Next.js is a highly versatile framework offering all the building blocks to create immersive web applications, fast and ready for production. Next.js provides many different ways of interacting with your data. You can pre-render pages at build time or server-side render them at request time. You can also retrieve data and put business logic into API routes, as well as middleware edge functions. Supabase works across the stack, offering the easiest way to authenticate your users and securely store and retrieve their data in any of these environments. Let's start from scratch and build a little user management application where we can authenticate and identify the user, store their profile information in the database and allow them to update their own information. And as a little bonus, we'll add image uploading functionality to store their profile pictures. We'll be working off of our Quickstart guide, which is also linked in the description below. So let's get started. If you haven't set up a project in Supabase yet, go to app.supabase.com and walk through the new project creation flow. Next, we need to set up our database schema, and we can easily use our Quickstart template to do that. So let's click on this link to go to our project's SQL editor, and then we can scroll down to the Quickstart section and we can select our user management starter. So here we create the table for our public profiles. We're using our Auth user ID, so this is from the Supabase Auth. We're using the user ID for our profile ID, and it is used as the primary key and it can't be null. We have an updated at timestamp, a username that needs to be unique. We have a full name, an avatar URL, and a website, and these are just text. And then we have a constraint just on our username length. And so we're just checking that the username is at least 3 characters. Then we're setting up something that is called row level security policies. And you can click through on this link here for more information to learn more about what row level security is. So we're just enabling row level security for our profiles. We're then setting a policy here for selecting data, so the read part, and this is public profile information, so we're just setting it true here. But then we don't want everyone to just update any profile information, so only authenticated users can update their own profile information, as well as, so this is the update policy here and the insert policy. So we're checking that only the authenticated user can update the row where the ID is their user ID. So this is how we make sure that the data is secure and can only be updated or inserted by the own user. We then use a trigger to automatically create a new entry in our profiles table. So this is a best practice we can do to automatically seed data as users are being authenticated. So you can click through here and read a little bit more about using triggers for this. So anytime some new user signs up on our website, we automatically copy an entry into our profiles, public profiles table. And then lastly, we're setting up storage so that we can upload their avatar profiles. And again, we can have some storage policies, so you can click through here and read a little bit more about that. But so now just click on run. And once that is run, so I already have my profile set up, we can step over here to our profiles and we can see our table is set up. So now we're all ready to go. The last thing we need is our API keys. So we can go to our settings and then API, and we can find our project URL and our project API keys. So Supabase automatically spins up an API for you, and that is what Next.js uses to then retrieve the data and interact with the database. Okay, so now our project is all set up, and we can go back and actually get to building our application. So here we have the option to use JavaScript or TypeScript. We're just going to use JavaScript here now, but if you're using TypeScript, you can just go ahead and switch that, and all the code snippets are with TypeScript as well. But so we're going to go ahead and we're going to use just vanilla JavaScript here, and we're going over to our terminal and we're just running the npx create next app latest, and we're using npm and we're calling it Supabase-Next.js. And so this is being set up now, and it's scaffolding our application. And so now we can step into Supabase Next.js, and let's open this up in VS Code. So we just have our default application set up. Let's open a terminal here as well. And we have some pages, our app page here, our index page, and we can go from here. As a first step, let's run npm run dev to make sure everything is working. And so we're running on localhost 3000, and so we can go back and just open up our project, localhost 3000. There we are. Welcome to Next.js. Perfect. So in the next step, what we want to do is we want to be able to connect with our Supabase database API. And so we're just creating an .env.local file. We can do this from the terminal, touch.env.local. So here we are, and make sure, if you're storing secret environment variables in there, that you don't commit them to your GitHub. And so we're just going to copy these variables. So in our case, we're just using the anon key. So the anon key is what we can publicly expose. So this is what allows us to actually retrieve and store data client-side without having any need for any server. So we can actually use something like static site generation with Next.js and fetch our data either at build time or at runtime on the client side. We can do that because we have the anon key and the role level security policies to secure our data. So this is a really nice thing we can do with Supabase. So let's go to our API settings. We copy our URL for the public URL here. There we are. And then we copy our anon key. Now the important thing is don't use the service role key, because this one has the ability to bypass row level security. So this is not something you want to ever share publicly. It's basically an admin key that you can use in kind of a secure server-side environment, but don't use it on the client side. So anything that's next public, you don't want to use the service role, only the anon key. So let's store that in there. Okay, great. And so we can go on to our next step. And so the next step would be to set up a login component. Oh, I think I forgot one step is to actually install Supabase.js. That was a bit too quick there. So let's go ahead and install our Supabase.js. So that's our JavaScript library we're using throughout our application. We can use that on the client side. We can use that on the server side. It's an isomorphic JavaScript client, so it runs in any of these environments. Now, for our login component, we can use the Supabase auth helpers, which will help us to identify our users throughout with, maybe at client-side data retrieval, server-side rendering, and so we have all the utilities we need to identify our users throughout our application. So we can go ahead and install our auth helpers for React and our auth helpers for Next.js. So let's go ahead and install those. And then what we can do is we can set up our page. So our root page, we set up the session context provider, and this is the session context that we can use throughout our application to have hooks like use user, use Supabase client, all these convenient methods. So now let's go ahead and copy that over into our component. So we're keeping the CSS import, and we're creating our browser Supabase client. So this uses our .env.local variables to create the client, and we're using use state here. So we actually need to import use state from React. So we're importing use state. There we are, and we're using that to create a new browser Supabase client every time on every first render. So that's what we're doing here. And then we're passing our Supabase client to our session context provider, and we're passing an initial session prop. So this is if we're rendering server-side pages and we're already getting the session on the server, we can pass it into the session context. So it's immediately available on the client side. Okay, so now we have this set up. In the next step, we can set up our login component, and for this we can use Supabase Auth UI. So this is a really convenient pre-built React component we can use for authentication. So let's go ahead and install our Auth UI React. And what we can do then is we can add our auth component to our homepage. And so we're just going to remove kind of all the default stuff from the homepage, and we're just copy our homepage here. And so we're just getting the auth component and our theme, Supabase theme. If you look into the docs for the auth component, then you can find that ways to expand the theme, but let's do this for now. And then lastly, what we can do, we can fetch the CSS actually. So there's an optional step that we skipped earlier where we can get the global CSS file from here. So this is just global CSS, so that can give us a little bit of styling. So if we go to styles, global, and overwrite that, and then we have a bit of styling. And so now we can go ahead and maybe run our page again in dev mode. And so we can open up our page again. And now we can see we have a nice sign-in component here. We can also easily extend this with OAuth providers. So we could have an array, and we can say, you know, if we want to have GitHub in here, and then we can sign in with GitHub, or, you know, maybe we want Apple as well. Then we can have sign in with GitHub, sign in with Apple, and we still need to set that up in our backend, but it's very easy to integrate the authentication here. And so now what we can do is we can maybe sign in. So thor@supabase.io and my password. Now, obviously, I cannot sign in because I don't have an account yet. So this is the first time. So I will need to sign up instead. And so when I click sign up, I now need to check my email for the confirmation link. And that has come through already. So let me copy the confirmation link and paste that in here. And so now we're logged in, and we can see that we have a session now. And so because we have the session, we now see that our account page will go here. So let's go ahead and make the account page. So we have our login component all set up. There we go. And then in the next step, we will need to set up our account page. And so let's create a new account component in the components folder. So we can say create new file, components account.js. And then we can copy this here and step through it when we're in our file. So what we're doing is we are having our account component, we are passing the session to our account component. And so once we have the session, we then get the profile information from our database, and we're just setting up some loading states, some states here, and we can use this use user hook from our auth helpers React within our session context to get our user object. And so then what we can do is, in order to get our profile information for the logged in user, we can just say from our profiles table, we want the username, the website, and the avatar URL, and we only want to get the row where the ID equals the user ID. Remember, our select from the profiles table was public, so any user, any unauthenticated user or logged in user can retrieve all the public profiles, and so that's why we need the filter here. So we can get our profile for the logged in user, and then what we can do is if we have any data that is being returned from the database, we can set our username, website, avatar URL to the data, and otherwise we can return an error. And then also we have an update profile method, and so we're just doing our update here. Again, we're putting in the user ID, username, website, avatar URL from our state variables, and then updated at, which is setting to the current date, basically to ISO string. And yeah, and then what we're doing is basically from our profiles table, we perform this upsert operation where we then, either insert or update our profile information. And that's pretty much it. So that's what our account component does. And so we have this now set up. And so let's go back to our index page. We can then import our account component from our components. So in our index page, we import our account, and then we can put our account page here instead of the link, and we need to pass a session to the account, which will just be our session variable, and then close this out, and there we are. And so now if we go back to our page, we can see we have our account page here, and we can now go ahead and say I'm Thor Web Dev, and my website is thorweb.dev. And now if I hit update, we say our profile has been updated. We can actually go ahead and look at our database to see if that is correct. And yes, we can see we have our information here, website. We don't have an avatar URL yet because we haven't uploaded anything yet. But so this is pretty much how you can implement user authentication. So if you now sign out and then sign back in, we can see our information is persisted and retrieved from the database. Super fast, super quick, super easy. So yeah, there we are. So this is the basic user management we've built in. And now let's do a little bonus and actually use Supabase Storage. So every project is configured with Supabase Storage. And what we can do is we can create a little upload widget. So we're just creating a new component in here, calling it avatar.js. And we can copy our code and step through it. Again, we're using our auth helpers React. So because we've set up our session context here and we passed it that Supabase client that we created, we can then use the use Supabase client hook to retrieve our Supabase client, and we're then able to interact with like the Supabase storage client from the avatars, get download our image when we have one, and then we can set our avatar URL, or we can upload our avatar. And so we're just using kind of a file input, HTML file input. We're just getting the name of the file, and then the file name, we're just using the user ID. So this actually allows us, for example, then to write some row level security policies as well for specific files, where we could say, only the user can access their own file, for example. And so we're just storing the user ID. And then we're just saying storage from avatars, and we upload our file path and our file here, which is just our file from our HTML input file. And then here we just say upsert true, so that we're able to basically upload a new avatar with the same file name. So that's what we set upsert true. And then there we have it. That's pretty much it. And so in the last step now, we just need to add our new widget to our account page. So let's go back to our account component, import our avatar, and then we're just getting our avatar here, putting that into our form widget. So if we go here, we have our form widget in there. And so I think we can just pass it into our div here, the avatar. We're passing our user.id so that we can see if we already have an avatar URL on our user object. If we have that retrieved from the database, then we can show the image. And otherwise, on upload, we're setting the avatar URL, and then we're calling update profile to update the avatar URL in the profile. And so we can go ahead, go back, and now we see this upload widget. Maybe we upload our little avatar here. And so we're uploading. We can see our profile has been updated. And so now if we go back to our project, we can, if we refresh here, we can see that we now have an avatar URL. And so if we head over to storage and to our avatar bucket, we can see that it has been uploaded to our Supabase project. And so now if we sign out and sign back in, we can then see that, okay, now all our information is there. We can update it, but it's securely stored in our application. And so there we are. This is pretty much how you can implement authentication and secure data storing and retrieving into Next.js. A couple of next steps you can do. You can look at the complete example on GitHub. We also have many other examples here that you can check out. You can explore more of our Auth UI. There is customization that you can do. You can switch themes, you can override themes. So a lot of customization you can do there. Explore the auth helpers for Next.js. We've only covered client-side data fetching here. With row-level security policies, we can do the same thing on the server side. So server-side rendering, we have this convenience method called with page auth. And there we can basically restrict access to a page, for example, a profile page, to logged in users. Anyone who's not logged in, we can redirect them. And then it automatically injects our user object in there. We can run some get server-side props. We can run queries in here as well. We can do server-side data fetching. So we get like server client here. So, the whole suite of Next.js capabilities Supabase integrates across the stack. Then you can also look at this great community project called Supabase Cache Helpers. So this is specifically for interacting with Supabase on the client side, for caching queries, for mutations. So it is basically a wrapper over this stale while revalidate hook. And so it really integrates deeply into that Supabase ecosystem. And yeah, I think if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you can look into our Next.js subscription payment starter. It's one of our most popular starter applications, integrates with Auth, database, Stripe checkout, Stripe customer portal. So all kind of the important things to build like a fully fledged, SaaS application is kind of built in there. Alrighty, and with that, our Quickstart is done. You have now Next.js, all the power of Next.js and Supabase at your fingertips. And so we can't wait to see what you built. Thanks so much for tuning in, and see you next time.